Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 11th annual Hamptons Doc Fest. This is a very special day, very special award for us to be honoring a special person. And I'm Jackie LaFaro, Festival Director, and we're happy to see you all here. I hope you're staying for the gala. I hope you're coming back tomorrow. We have wonderful films. And then on Monday, the Douglas Elliman Free Community Day, which is great. Just a quick shout out and thanks to our sponsors, Bridgehampton National Bank, Douglas Elliman, Long and Matone, and Robin Long is here. They're our Audience Award sponsors, and People's United Bank. So thank you very much. We couldn't do what we do for you without the generosity of donors and sponsors. So just keep us in mind at the end of the year, okay? This award today is the Sloan Shelton Human Rights Award. And we named it for Sloan Shelton, who was a great American actor who personified courage in her heart and in the roles that she played. She was in American theater for many, many years. She actually, her partner, Jan Buckaloo, is here. And Jan said she saw a glimpse of Sloan in the Terrence McNally film on Thursday night, our opening night film. And so this award is for her. And it represents a filmmaker and a film who had special courage and who were able to change parts of the culture, humanity, and the world. So this year, we are giving it to unfortunately, our lost Kirk Simon, and we are awarding it to his brother Ron, who was also a partner in filmmaking. But I just want to read you a little bit about what Kirk Simon has done over the years. The film you're going to see is an Academy Award-winning short. It won in 2011, Strangers No More. Kirk also won a Primetime Emmy in 2015 for Outstanding Children's Program for Masterclass. It was an HBO series for an episode about Alan Alda. And then in 1990, an Emmy for Outstanding Information Cultural Historical Programming for Chimps, so like us. Kirk did wonderful, wonderful work, and we are so proud to be able to honor him with the Sloan Shelton Human Rights Award, and we place it in Ron's loving hands for his brother, Ron Simon. Ron is going to read something very special to you.
Thank you so much, Jackie. One of the most special days my brother and I had was when we presented our Pulitzer Prize film on this stage. So it's really important that Kirk receives this award. I should say I talked to Kirk's crew and family in preparation for this day, and everyone was so overjoyed that Kirk received this award, and especially received it for this film. First of all, I do want to say that Kirk's two oldest children are here, Oliver and Allegra Simon. They're sitting in the back. Thanks. And Kirk's work continues. He was working on 2 projects before he suddenly passed away. And the office manager of Simon Plus Film is here, Catherine Mulry Ludlow. Catherine, keeping the spirit alive. And certainly Kirk's spirit was embodied in his dedication to education, how to present children and education on film. That was one of the major themes of his work throughout his career. And I think this film exemplifies that vision, the importance that you can change the world through an optimistic message. It's interesting that the honoree tonight, Sheila Nevins, said something very important about Kirk's films. Most filmmakers want to show you the worst of the world and hope that motivates you. Kirk was very different. He wanted to show you something positive, and he thought that that would motivate you. And I think one of the most optimistic films he ever made was Strangers No More. And as I mentioned, I talked to the crew, and there's so many interesting stories, and I'll be sharing that with you afterwards. But one person that I communicated with today is Karen Tall. She is one of the foremost educators in the world today. She began as principal and founder of this school, and then has gone on to create a whole educational program throughout Israel. And it's really creating schools for immigrant children, children at risk. And she sort of has a vision and passion. And she wrote about this film, which I want to read you, and maybe it will give you a framework to think about it as you watch these very stirring images. So from Karen Toll, looking back, I can say that this movie was indeed a life-changing event for me. It had and continues to have a wide influence and motivates action and doing. If I had to come up with one sentence that encompasses the lessons and influence that I received from working with Kirk, it is, from invisible to visible. All human beings need this. From invisible to visible, the wonderful children from 48 countries, whom you will see, voiceless, facing meaninglessness, and with a big fear of the world. These invisible children received a voice and color with this film. Screening this movie around the globe filled their hearts with pride. Due to the human message in this movie, we, the staff, and many volunteers never gave up on one children. In our world, at the end of 2018, there are still cruel wars that leave children without a roof and without a voice. Still, at the end of 2018, waves of immigration children are growing, and many countries are without sensitivity and heart. This film continues to be the light of hope all over the world. So please think about and enjoy Strangers No More. Thank you so much for the award.
Thank you, Ron.
We all know each other. We work on the advisory committee for this festival, so it's great to be on the stage here, too. Just as I mentioned, I talked to many of the members of the crew of this film, learned some interesting things of how creative decisions were made to put the film together and tell this story. It's interesting that Kirk and his partner, Karen Goodman, arrived in Tel Aviv. They were just doing a sort of portrait of life there. They ran into this school, and they decided, we have to do a film about it. But they really wanted to experience the school, so they just sort of observed. They brought their cameras in and then tried to develop the story that way. And as both of you know, the most important thing is to establish some type of rapport with your lead characters. And just tell you a little bit about the different characters. Mohammed, who seems very confident, they had a really small room where they would talk to the students and record them on film. When they first met Mohammed, he did not want to go into that room. It reminded him of an interrogation cell, and he was really fearful of this whole project. In fact, Mohammed, always had his questions. He didn't invite the filmmakers to his home. But part of the skill of being a documentary filmmaker is developing that rapport and that trust with your characters. And certainly, Nigel, you've done that, Roger, over the years. And the other two characters are also interesting. Esther was much more open, and she was the one who invited the crew back to her home, and it was a good deal distance from Tel Aviv. And I was talking to cinematographer Buddy Squires. He just mentioned how difficult it was to get to that place, but it was, Kirk and Karen encouraging that these scenes in her apartment are very, very important. And the other lead character, Johannes, was sort of just arriving, and he was sort of on the fringe, and he developed a relationship with Allegra, Kirk's eldest daughter, and it was through that relationship that Allegra brought Johannes into this film, and he's so important. And obviously the experience of learning about his classes just give you a sense of what the school is like. So do you want to just talk about how filmmakers sort of develop that relationship? I mean, that's so important, and as you look at that, Nigel, you've done international films too.
Before we talk about that, I'd like to say thank God for compassionate, driven teachers. I think they should be paid a lot of money. I did it by hanging out with the kids. I didn't have to travel as far as Kirk did for this film, but I have to say that when I saw this film, I said to Kirk, boy, I wish I'd made that film too. In fact, I was very happy to hear you say earlier that Kirk liked to make positive films and that they would mean more. And I agree. I have hopefully worked on positive films because I think they last. My goodness, this film is as important today as it was when he made this film and should be shown. My way was to go hang out and sit in the classroom on the floor with the kids and get to know them all by name and go back every day for a couple of weeks and then pop up again and bring a member of the crew with me for them to see so they weren't suddenly surprised by 4 or 5 men climbing over them, putting up lights and things like that. With Voices of Sarafina, which was a film about the South Africans that came to Lincoln Center. I was asked by Lincoln Center to make a film, and I said, well, when are they arriving? Because I should probably go to South Africa and travel with them. Oh, they just arrived. I said, oh, goodness, missed the most important scene of them seeing America for the first time. So I moved into a hotel with them and stayed with them in that hotel, walked to the theater from the hotel, hung out with them before even attempting to roll a footer film. So it's very much an important thing to obviously give them confidence in you as a person. And then they really open up and they say the most surprising things.
A smile goes a very long way, even if you speak someone's language, especially if you don't speak someone's language. If you're open, people feel it, and children feel it better than anyone. And so sitting there on the floor, smiling, being open, getting a kid's attention, having them come over and look through the camera, take a picture, show them the picture, make a print, give them the picture. Those are all ways to develop trust.
If I may, I grew up working in the theater, and I learned about spontaneity. And spontaneity has been a big word for me in making films throughout my life. And kids are the most spontaneous when they feel free. They are spontaneous, like we never are. And their facial expressions, and you see it in this film, their facial expressions tell you everything. Oh, it's wonderful working with kids.
And I think there were several choices that Kirk made that wanted to keep you on that smile on the face of kids. I was talking to the editor, Nancy Baker, and there was a question of how far do you go into their backstory? And Kirk and Karen wanted to keep it in the present tense as much as they could. So they, some filmmakers could have had the kids return home where all the horrors were. They didn't want to do that. But they did want to make a reference, so they just had abstract images that gave you a sense of what it might be like in Darfur or South Africa. So your attention, different filmmakers could have made different choices, and you could have felt the harsh reality that these kids are from. But they wanted to focus more on the potential for change, so it kept in a more positive light, and that was certainly the way Kirk made, most of his films, especially dealing with education and arts.
Yeah, we all know how horrible it is from 10,000 miles away, from seeing it on the news. We can't really ever know what these kids have gone through. So just that they said a few words about it, we were there with them. That's all we needed.
It also made it a shorter film, which is, I think, in documentaries, pretty important.
And I remember Kirk told me that there's one little structuring device, and you might not even pick up on it, that it was Sheila Nevins, from HBO, who'll be honored later tonight, gave the suggestion, I think it really helps the flow of this film, is to make this like a school year. So putting the titles of September and January and March was Sheila's way of sort of keeping that flow going and getting a sense that you are living with these kids as they go through a school year. In the first cut, it didn't have that, but it changes, those little things change everything.
Yeah, it also makes you understand what they achieved in such a short amount of time. It's extraordinary.
As filmmakers, I think we have good ideas of what we hope to accomplish, and we have to be very flexible to throw them away. We call it killing our darlings. And I might have this fantastic idea, and I might be actually the last person to understand that it doesn't work. And I mean, I've had my music composer say, I've been telling you for months and months, that doesn't work. And finally I go, well, I guess it doesn't work. But it's really important to have outside people come in, and it's really important to let go of the structure that you thought was so great and be open to just what's on the screen. If it's not communicating on the screen, and we always bring people in, and I say I bring, you know, trusted people in to kick my butt, and the film will be better later. And it's always surprises that I didn't recognize. A scene that might be an hour into my film, I'm told, that's the nugget of your entire subject. Why are you waiting so long for that to be there? And you put it up to the first half hour and you go, duh.
Yeah, I would bring my films home from my rough cuts home for my wife to see. And I remember her, it was always good if she didn't knit while watching the film.
And this is a short film, and certainly immigration in any country around the world is a complicated problem, much debated by the right and the left of the different parties in the country. And such is the case, obviously, in Israel, too. And it's interesting that some of the right-wing politicians, when they saw this film after it received the Academy Award, they sort of looked into the background of several of the kids, and there was discussion of deporting them. There was a worry that they would become too much part of Israeli society. And so, and if you go and read a lot of this debate, it's very much like every country you read. And it's one thing I think that Kirk wanted to inspire you to look at, but going into having politicians debate immigration was not really what this film was about. So we'll talk a little bit about Kirk, too. I should say that his life changed when he was in 9th grade or so, and he got a still camera and allowed him to document the world around him. But his life really changed when he went to Hampshire College and sort of were among students who really, in many ways, changed documentary film. His classmates included Roger, Ken Burns, the cinematographer Buddy Squires, Karen Goodman, and a whole host of others. And there was something that was so, transforming about Hampshire in the 70s that really created a whole new wave of documentary filmmakers. And everyone that wants to become a documentary filmmaker, I think it comes from those days at Hampshire in many ways that was spread. Could you just talk about what that was like, Roger?
Hampshire College is in Amherst, Massachusetts. It's a very progressive school where you design your own course curriculum. You work with faculty and students to put benchmarks ahead of you, and you then have to accomplish what you set out to do, and your committee will hold you to it. So there are no grades. It's much, much, much more complicated than grades. This was the early 70s. Hampshire was started in 1970. It actually was one of the first liberal arts colleges with a film and photography department. Jerome Liebling was perhaps the first photo professor at the university level. He came from the University of Minnesota. Elaine Mays was the second or third female professor at the university level. We're not talking about technical photography classes. It was a very small program. There were maybe 20 or 30 of us. They put us in the basement in one room, the basement of the library, no windows. Well, you know, it's film. You're in the dark, so you don't need windows. It was very, very, very intense. We had critiques where people cried. We were very tough on each other, and it was about seeing. The whole idea was, why did you look at it that way? How do you see? What is it that's important to you in seeing? The technical stuff, if you wanted to learn that, you had to get that on your own. And it created an atmosphere in those of us who survived it that we went on to be, I mean, everything, I see everything as political. I don't consider myself a political filmmaker as such, but every frame of a film is telling a story and is, in a way, very political. So Kirk and Karen, who he later married, and Ken, and we were there experimenting. Both Jerry and Elaine were filmmakers and still photographers. Kirk was a still photographer and a filmmaker, Karen the same. I went there to be a photographer. I dropped out of college and I just moved to Amherst before discovering Hampshire College, and when I did, I said, maybe it's time to go back to school. Since I'm not being a photographer, I'm more earning my daily bread. And took up film as any art student would take some other art class. And we were thrown together, the filmmakers and photographers, in upper-level critique classes because it's all about images. So we got out and struggled and worked, and Kirk and Karen created Simon Goodman Picture Company, and the rest literally is a very positive history.
I mean, it's almost amazing because back in the 70s, you didn't have many students aspiring to be a documentary filmmaker. But it was that sort of wave and passion, and I remember Kirk and Ken working on films, that sort of created a passion of students around the country. Well, and now everyone wants to be a documentary filmmaker in some way, but back then it was really this,
well, every network had a documentary division, which 5 years after we graduated had closed. So already documentaries were on the wane. But we had an organization, a student-run film company called Hampshire Films, and the idea was to do a film for a nonprofit organization. There was no salary, there was no rentals. It was the only, we were not competing with commercial filmmakers because we were doing the films at 1/10 the cost. And the idea was that one person would do their senior thesis film as the producer-director, and other people in the classes would work with them. And Ken and I ran Hampshire Films for a semester, and we got a grant, and Ken got a film for Old Sturbridge Village, which is a historical village in central Massachusetts. So Ken was the director, and Kirk was his number two. And they went for an entire semester and to make this film, which was Ken's first historical documentary. And we all would go and do different things, and I did sound and I did other things, but it was really Ken and Kirk there. And you got real-world experience. You were dealing with clients. You had to show them your footage. You had to defend, why were you doing it like this? It didn't always go so well with some other filmmakers, but they made a pretty remarkable film, and it was Ken and Kirk.
Right, but I think it was that experience that the whole group of you were able to sustain a career of 30-plus years because you knew everything from the financing to the actual making of the film.
You make it sound like that, but I got to tell you, we started Florentine Films in 1976, a year after Ken and I both graduated, and then Buddy graduated in '76. I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, we were struggling. We were having a really hard time. We would sell ourselves as crew to European networks, BBC, RAI, Italian television, French television. That's how we cut our teeth. And I went to my professor, Jerry, and I said, Jerry, I don't know, maybe I should go to graduate school. And he said, Roger, you're not going to graduate school. You're going to be a filmmaker. And
you all became filmmakers. Yeah.
so it was a struggle, but hey, here we are.
Nigel, I mean, certainly that Hampshire spirit sort of infused documentary filmmaking. You were in there before, so could you just talk about young talent now as they approach the field?
Be positive.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, as you said, everybody wants to be a filmmaker now, and everybody is a filmmaker because they walk around with these iPhones, shooting these things, putting them out on the internet, and they think they're distributing their films too. Well, I don't think it's quite like that anymore. But it is different. It's very, very different. And I'm glad I'm an old fart retiring from the film business, to be very honest. I mean, I learned by being a technician, for being a sound person. After I left the theater, wanted to get outdoors. I hated being in dark rehearsal rooms and for days on and days on. I wanted to do the same thing in the real world, and came to America at the suggestion of Peter Brook, who got me a job in New York, and I loved it, and I loved this country. It was 1964, and I learned by watching directors at work. I didn't know much about sound when I got started, but I learned fast, and I watched directors for, let's say, 18 years before I decided, is it that much? My wife should tell me here, but she isn't to tell me the dates. I have no memory for dates. 64, 81. So yes, about 15, 16 years, and I decided that the directors I was working for didn't know much about filmmaking, and I better prove to myself that I could make a film. And I made a film about a bunch of kids in Brooklyn, and as you know. It is shown here at this film festival a couple of times, Close Harmony. And I found a profession that was so involving. I mean, once you get hooked into a story, you can't get anything else out of your head. You work on it 24 hours a day. I found that there was, I was not paying attention to my children like I should be. So I didn't work hard all the time. And I think that's very important, not to shoot everything that moves. To go back to your question about young people, I'm very happy I learned when there was film. And film was expensive, and the processing was expensive. First making the negative, then making a print, and now all of that is free, essentially. And that means that everybody shoots everything that moves. And they have no idea whether it refers back to the through line of what the film is about. So it gives an editor a huge problem.
I think that what Hampshire College did for us is show us what real passion was, and instilled in us I don't think you're given passion. I don't think you learn passion. I think we come to it with a desire, and then we're helped to be molded to say, this is really important. We would all say we would rather do documentaries and find what real life is than make up stories. And we got out of school to try to change the world, and to try to do our little bit and take our passions. And that's, Jerry Liebling is on my shoulder all the time. Am I working hard enough? Am I doing what I need to do to change the world in my own little way?
Well, we have time for a few questions, but I just want to do two updates. One about the students in the film. I did talk to Karen Tall, and she told me that Mohammed is now studying in London and doing very well. Johannes is still at the Tel Aviv school, and he's also doing very well. Esther had to go back with her family to South Africa. When her father remarried, that creates some type of immigration problem, so she had to go back. But she is doing well in South Africa. And just an update on my brother's film. He was working on several films before his passing, and one was on the conductor Michael Tilson Thomas, and he was pretty far along on that film, and we were very pleased that Susan Fromke, who presented a film here on the Metropolitan Opera last year, is continuing the film. So his vision, his footage will be made into a film for American Masters next year. There's also the possibility of a film on Alan Alda that he had planned too. That's continuing. So, his vision continues in the office on 73rd Street. So any questions here? Yes.
You spoke to the effect of film being more expensive when you were coming up, and I was just kind of thinking about how I believe, it's my opinion, that it's the job of the director to let the story do the storytelling, as opposed to the director doing the storytelling. So wouldn't it make more sense to shoot it and then figure out what the story is, as opposed to do the story and then edit it together?
Well,
Got 2 hours?
the way I approached documentaries was to figure out a basic through line, right? A very short description of what this film is about. Figure out what the beginning of the film was, and figure out what the end of the film should be, and let the middle take care of itself. Because the story, as you shoot it, will lead you to interesting new places. And the editing room is a very special environment. What you get on that train journey from one station to another, and you got off the train and you got this stuff, and you got that, and you got this, is the only world that the editor has to work with. Unless you go out and shoot some more, which is not always possible and not necessary sometimes. And I think that the more you give the editor, the more he or she is confused by what you intend.
The best films are very narrowly focused. And if you take a subject that's too broad, if Kirk and Karen had gone to Tel Aviv and just tried to make a film about Israel, how could you possibly do that? So I know they were looking for that school, even though they didn't know that that was what they were going to find. So for me, I try to learn as much as I can about the subject. I try to be very narrowly focused on it. I try not to let it go off into lots of different directions. And then I try to be flexible, as I said before, because you never know what's going to come up one day or the next. And then the film is made in the editing room. You can make, it's not hard to make a good film. To make a great film, whew, and that's in the editing room.
And certainly Strangers No More is a film that's open to experience. There was no thesis here. And they probably, with Kirk and Karen's passion for education, the school found them. And they were the filmmakers to make this.
Right.
And that's the way it is for a lot of filmmakers. Mm-hmm. Your subject finds you because it will find your passion.
The thing is, less is more.
Other questions? Yes.
I'm surprised how much English was spoken by the characters, by the people in the film. It wasn't dubbed. I noticed that I could read the lips of the really was the teachers and some of the students were actually speaking English. Is that true? I mean, there is that much English. I mean, I didn't hear that much Hebrew spoken. Well, their language, of course, was much more different.
Yeah, I don't know much about linguistics, but certainly all the teachers are obviously very fluent in English.
There's a lot of English in Israel.
Right, and Karen Hall wrote a beautiful, beautiful letter. So I think that's one reason, obviously, this film works so well, because they were so multilingual. They have to respond to every language in the world.
You kind of alluded to for a moment the political aspects of it in terms of the right window. I was just wondering, is this part of the Israeli school system, or is this an independent school?
This is more an independent school, and Karen Hall has been one of the independent educators that really have worked in developing programs, especially for foreign workers and families seeking asylum. So they've been able to develop and raise funds throughout the world for this educational experience.
Susan?
Has the school as a model been copied in other places?
Well, certainly Karen Hall and her successor have done lectures throughout the world, and they were just at Hunter College about 3 months ago. And this film sort of is a focal point for that, but certainly this, you know, the experiences they have in the school, especially now with all of the problems raised by immigration and families seeking asylum, this becomes certainly a model, and certainly they are, you know, questioned, and they have conversations with educators around the world. So I think our time is out. So thank you so much again for the award, and thank you, Nigel, and thank you, Roger.